I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Nick Maniatis.
I'm Tony Mcmahon.
And welcome everybody to episode 34 of The Great Concavity, a special OzWallace conference review episode, so stay tuned. Alright, so like I said, episode 34, here we are with two very special guests who are familiar to our listeners and our community. Nick Maniatis, Howling Fantods, and Dr. Tony Mcmahon, who is a Wallace Scholar, world traveler extraordinaire. Welcome to the show, guys. Thanks so much for coming on again.
Thank you. Good to be back.
No worries, guys.
Right on. It's a very special early morning edition for our Australian guests, 6:30 a.m. local time for them. So thanks for staying up late and waking up early, respectively, Tony and Nick. So you two gentlemen recently got to partake in quite a serious way in the OzWallace conference in Melbourne, Australia, early September. So we got Nick to be our personal correspondent on the ground, and Nick has done a wide range of interviews with conference attendees and presenters. So this episode will basically just look like us talking for a bit about impressions of the conference and how things have been since, and then we'll launch into Nick's conference interviews. So it'll be very similar to our episode 17 episodes from ISU last summer in 2016. So that's sort of what we're doing. We're going to hear from a wide range of people that Nick got to talk to, many of which are familiar, have been on the show before, and also a lot of new faces too. I could list them all right now, but that would take too long, and you'll just hear from them a bit later. So, Nick, how was that for you, getting a chance to talk to a whole bunch of people on record?
It was completely stressful.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think it was just dropping in and out of informal conversation, trying to be a little bit more structured. And I think finally when I got into a roll of things, which was on the final day, and doing things like only having a few seconds with Lucas Thompson, one not realising he was running off early, and having that crazy hyper-compressed me just saying his talk was great. But I did enjoy catching lots of the pub conversation and all the conversation at the AFL game, which I know we're going to hear a bit of as well. Tony and I had a great time at that, and I thought that evening, that event, it was that point where everybody at the conference was getting to know each other. So, but I was glad I got to do it, and people wanted to say hello on the podcast, so that was nice.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're very appreciative of you taking on that very heavy burden of sitting down with, I think there's about 15, 16 interviews that you got.
Yeah, I got quite a few people,
Yeah. So that's awesome, man. We really appreciate it.
And we should back up and say Tony didn't just attend the conference. He
planned
it, he dreamed it up, he organized it. And Tony, did it meet your expectations of when you originally dreamed it up? How did it live up to what you thought it would be?
The first ever Australian David Foster Wallace conference, I guess I felt a little bit of a sense of responsibility, and I didn't sort of allow my energies to fade the way they usually did when I was organising these kinds of events. Like, I've never organised a conference before. These are kind of completely unrelated events I'm talking about. But yeah, so my energy levels stayed pretty high. I mean, I paid for it after the conference, but I think that the conference was really well organised, and I'm not blowing my own trumpet here. I had a lot of help, most notably from people like Nick and my colleague at RMIT, Bridget Magna, without whom the conference seriously would not have happened. But yeah, so overall it really did kind of exceed my expectations. The level of scholarship I thought was first rate. There were no parallel panels. As much as I love the conference in normal, one thing I really don't like about it is that oftentimes you go there and you have to make these horrible choices between seeing two people whose work you really admire speak because they're on at the same time. Because there were fewer people, I think 32 panelists at the end of the conference. Everybody got to see everybody's panel, so it kind of created a real sense of community. So, I was really, really happy about that. So
awesome.
So, I mean, I guess the question I have for both of you guys is, how do we get more people to Australia?
Yeah, I think if the Wallace Society pays all their flights, that'd probably be the easiest way.
Should be
it's a long
budget,
haul, isn't it? It's a long haul.
We have enough for about 2 people.
Yeah.
We did contribute to a couple of people, actually.
I think there are a few little thank yous.
You know, that issue, because like I really want to attend, and there were a lot of people I know who really wanted to attend.
You were there via video phony, Matt.
Yeah, and you had several Skype panels. What was that like from a point of view? I mean, I feel like that's part of the future of conferences, is just inevitable. There's always going to be Skype panels. And Tony, you've seen it work several different ways. How do you think that fits in with the conference overall, as having people via Skype?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't really get a chance to think about it much during the course of the conference, but now, what are we, a couple of months later, I do remember someone saying to me that they were really a big fan of Claire Hayes-Brady's work, and they were really looking forward to seeing her. And I said to this person who was a student of mine, oh, well, she's appearing via Skype because she hasn't been able to make it out here. And this student of mine was, young person, 20, 21 years old. She was like really disappointed that she was only appearing by Skype, via Skype. And I didn't really get it at the time, but because I was just too crazy busy, I suppose. But now that I think about it, I suppose it's just that thing that you don't get to speak to them after their call.
Yeah. Hang out at the pub.
They don't get to come to the pub. They don't get to, there's no summer camp stuff going on. No conversations in the hallways.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, it probably is the future of conferences. I mean, I think you're right, but I don't know, maybe it's just the old Luddite in me. But I just don't think it works as well overall.
Yeah, there's something lost in that face-to-face personal interaction thing that spans over the whole, 2-3 days or whatever, that is, insanely valuable. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the papers themselves are fine. I don't think there's any difference in presenting a paper in person and presenting one via Skype, but it's all the kind of extracurricular stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the diversity of the panels and the number of people? And Nick, this is for you too, like as a participant, and Tony as an organizer, of how much thought went into trying to have different kinds of representation at the conference.
Do you want to start, Nick? Or
look, my conference experience from Wallace level stuff, not talking about my other teaching things, I'm totally obvious, incredible diversity compared to, say, footnotes at CUNY many years ago, whenever that was.
2009.
2009, yeah. And I know that there's been that push within the Wallace community and with the David Foster Wallace Society, but just such as a diverse range of panelists. I don't know. It really didn't have that Wallace Boys Club feeling, which I was very thankful for. I'll leave it there. Awesome. Tony, what about you? You've got more.
Yeah. Well, to the question of how much thought went into it, the answer is like absolutely zero, because it was kind of out of my hands. The people who decided to come to OzWallace, people who applied to come to OzWallace, I mean, there was only one person who I kind of said, well, I don't really think that your paper will work. Everybody else who applied came, and I think there was one cancellation. So it was kind of out of my hands. It just sort of was what it was. And if I'm remembering correctly, the gender makeup of the 32 panelists was almost exactly 50% men, 50% women, which I was very happy about. I mean, I feel a bit strange speaking on behalf of people in this respect, but there were a handful, 3, maybe 4 people who I guess would have identified as people of colour, and there was, which is 3 or 4 more than I've ever seen at any other Wallace conference, and there was a student of mine who identified herself as a queer woman. So, and again, that's one more than I've ever seen in any other Wallace conference.
And how many total presenters were we talking about?
32.
32?
Cool.
32, okay.
Yeah. Cool. In terms of like actual presentation topics, how many of those sort of stood out as like addressing issues of diversity in Wallace's work? Is that well represented too?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah,
cool.
I think it was. Probably not as well represented as I would have liked to have seen. I think we, as members of the board of the society, and Diego and
Andrea.
the rest of Andrea and the rest of the diversity panel, I think we all still have a lot more work to do on that aspect of it. But yeah, my feeling from OzWallace was that at least these people are starting to get involved, at least people of different genders, different races, different sexual preferences were starting to get involved, were starting to get interested. And these people weren't necessarily talking about those kinds of issues, but, they were at least talking about Wallace, which is a start.
Cool.
I think.
Awesome. Great to get a good range. That's cool.
Yeah. I don't think I mentioned this, but it was also about fairly close to 50-50 Australian scholars and 50-50 overseas scholars. And
cool.
And of the 50% of overseas scholars, I think maybe we were talking mostly American, but there were a couple of Canadians. There was a guy from Denmark, a guy from Germany, a woman from New Zealand, and I'm probably forgetting somebody or
some UK as well.
David
Herring.
Speaker Dave Herring was from the UK, of course. Were there any other people from the UK? I'm not sure. I don't think so. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong.
I can't remember. I'm terrible at this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I need notes in front of me.
Well, I've got the program in front of me, so I should be able to tell. But but yeah. So just onto what was the kind of feeling of the conference. Again, that thing you were speaking about, I think towards the end of your interview with Grace Chipperfield, about her feelings on could Wallace write women or
right.
Whatever it was you were talking about a couple of episodes back with her. I think that was definitely a subject that was kind of alive and kicking in Melbourne. Would you agree with that, Nick? I mean, I think a fairly large percentage of the panels were we had Daniel Alley speaking about that. We had my student Rachel Short, who I already mentioned earlier, Claire Hayes-Brady. I think I actually had to run out halfway through her talk because I was in mad organiser mode. But would you agree with that, Nick? That assessment?
Yeah. It was actually hard to keep track of all the threads, and I know that you had some creative panel things, so that there were, I guess, similarities of themes, and panelists could respond to each other somewhat through their papers. But I mean, it was good because it kept me thinking the whole time. I found, I know that came through in some of the tweets that I put out as well, but it was very difficult to try and process and tweet and try and encapsulate that for everyone. It was a bit crazy.
And then do 15 interviews too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for doing those tweets, and thanks for doing the interviews. We really appreciate it.
No worries.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nick. So, Tony, what are your kind of, like, after the conference has been over for a couple months, what's kind of been the fallout? What's been, like, your feeling about it in the last, as you've been processing it in the last couple months? What kind of things have come out of it for you?
Well, like I said earlier, I think it really exceeded my expectations. I thought that, given that I was organising it, I thought it was going to be, like, it'd probably be good, but it wouldn't be great.
Very self-deprecating, Tony.
Well, the history, as I touched on earlier, history has shown that I'm really, really enthusiastic at the start of these things, and then I run out of energy halfway through.
Yeah.
I did run out of energy halfway through OzWallace, but I kept going anyway. And again, I'll mention Bridget Magner, who was just an enormous help, and also gave, like, a really cool paper on Broom of the System, which doesn't get enough academic attention, I think. So largely thanks to her, and Nick as well. I mean, he was like enormous. He was like, texting me, going, "Do you want me to show up early to help with registration?" Yeah, and then he was running around doing all this stuff for you guys, and then he was live tweeting. I mean, he was enormous as well. So I had a lot of help from a lot of people. It wasn't all to do with me. But yeah, really, really exceeded my expectations. At the conference dinner, after it was all over and everyone could kind of take a bit of a deep breath, I asked David Herring if he wouldn't mind giving an informal kind of conference wrap to everybody. So after we'd all finished dinner and all had a few drinks and we're all feeling a little bit merry, I did that. I did the old tap the wine glass with the knife thing, and Dave Herring stood up and said that besides Paris, it was the best Wallace conference he'd ever been to. So that made me feel pretty
That's saying
good.
a lot.
I mean, you're never going to beat Paris, right? Because it's in Paris.
I didn't go to Paris.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, if you had come to...
We missed you, Matt. I didn't know you yet, but we still missed you.
I mean, it's funny because Dave Herring, organized one of the first Wallace conferences in Liverpool in 2009. Maybe the first one, actually. I think that was the first one. So, I mean, I'm sure that his self-deprecating nature would not allow him to say that his was one of the best. But I'm sure it was pretty great being in Liverpool. And, I mean, I'm really sad that I missed it. And, and this is something I think about a lot, and that there are people, involved in Wallace studies that are not strictly in academia, like myself, who have 9-to-5 jobs, and it's really hard to attend, one conference a year, much less 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And that's a little different whenever you're, on a tenure track job, or you work in academia full time and you're able to attend more and more conferences as part of your professional life. So it's an interesting thing that our kind of the niche that we are all in is got a blend of people who, that is their life. And then there's people who they just go to one thing. And I'm sure there were people at OzWallace who had never been to another sort of Wallace event,
Yeah, there were. And that was one of the reasons I tried to include some kind of more non-academic panels, if you like. I did try and have a kind of variety of Q&A type panels, like the one we did with you, Matt, on the society.
I was decidedly non-academic when me and Mike Miley and I should say, did a panel there, and we talked about a lot of these same issues we were just talking about gender and diversity, and And that's kind of like, I was very self-aware during that, Tony, and I should tell you, like, you know, anytime you have like white dudes talking about like gender diversity, like you've kind of like have to just admit how fucked up it is. And you know, I'm very aware of it. Like even now, I'm just like so self-conscious all the time of it. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say, what to do. I mean, it's like we're trying to give an opportunity to other people to speak, but yet we're still speaking. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I and just before when I was talking about how many people of colour there were at OzWallace, I mean, who am I to say? I'm a white guy, you know. People of colour should be talking about how many people of colour there were at OzWallace. Yeah, it's a dilemma.
Yeah, it's nuanced for sure.
Well, and this moment too, like you said, the stuff about the kind of Harvey Weinstein era that we're in now, post Harvey Weinstein era. Yeah, that was kind of going down when I was at the Texas Book Festival at the beginning of November. And it's one of my favorite things in the year is that I always go to the Texas Book Festival and I always like to moderate a panel. And you get to talk to all these other writers who are in town. They bring in like 400 writers and agents and publishers. And the thing that was on everyone's mind was kind of the book publishing equivalent of this, which is a list that came out called Shitty Men in Media List. And if you haven't seen it, I mean, you can go and like hunt it down, and it's like an Excel spreadsheet, and it's, you know, people who work at all of these publications and media companies, and, you know, a list of charges varying from, you know, rape and sexual assault all the way down to like, you know, just made annoying comments. And that's really all anyone could talk about or think about, was kind of like this list, and like, did you know someone on it? Should this other person be on it? And sort of, you know, a long kind of standing feeling that I think is bubbled to the top now, and like definitely makes you think, like, what is our role or responsibility, or like what in any kind of power that you have, like what kind of, how do you exercise that without being, you know, complete worthless? You know, at least I think of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking on the, you know, being the eternal optimist, I mean, if you're going to organise an Australian Wallace conference, you've got to be an optimist, right? I mean, I just think about what's it going to be like in 10 years or 20 years or 40 years when I'm dead and my daughters are still around. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a Hollywood where this sort of stuff just doesn't happen anymore. You know, Wallace is still going to be read in 40 years. He's still going to be read in 140 years, in my opinion. And we won't be talking about this stuff anymore. It'll have been sorted out by
less hideous men on the scene, you think?
There'll be less. Well, it'll be sorted out by smarter and less white people than us. So, you know, and we'll be cool.
I mean, that's like the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, you know, is that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice.
Right.
And, you know, and I do believe that, like, each generation does seem to make progress. And, you know, I think of my grandfathers who were casual racists, if not outright racist, just because that was the culture. It was like, that's what they were raised up in. And, you know, I blame them so much for it? I don't know. It's hard to say, because it's like, what standard do you hold everyone who was born in, you know, 1700s to your standard? It's just, I mean, you can, but it's unrealistic. Like, you're just going to be disappointed. Mm-hmm.
Okay, just before we say anything else, Matt, I want to thank you profoundly for comparing me to Martin Luther King, by the way.
Both doctors. So.
I mean, when I think of Tony, that's the first thing that comes to mind every time. It's like, no, the sentiment was there, okay? The sentiment was there. The idea that things get better probably predates Martin Luther King Jr. So that was my simplistic reductionist of Roget's or Bartlett's familiar quotations. But,
any final thoughts on the conference, Tony?
Yeah.
Thoughts on a future OzWallace conference, things like that?
Well, there may be another OzWallace conference. You'll have to find another organizer, though, because fuck if I'm ever doing it again. It was just so stressful.
You have a newfound respect for Ryan Edel, I bet.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was worth it. I'd do it again in a heartbeat if I hadn't already done it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, so I really do hope that there'll be another one, because I don't know, it felt like, and again, it's going to sound a bit like I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but like I said, I just sort of thought it up, and a lot of other people did a lot of work, and obviously the panelists who came and presented were the people who made it so great. So, and plus, I've already been compared to Martin Luther King on this podcast. I don't want to compare myself to Tony Wilson from Factory Records, but I will. So, you guys know Tony Wilson, Factory Records, Manchester, England, put out bands like Joy Division, the Happy Mondays, started the Hacienda Club, basically invented house music. Anyway, he was this kind of...
Matt's shaking
I'm more
his
of a
head.
reader. I just read.
He was kind of this crazy Manchester guy who did all this like really historic sort of punk and post-punk stuff. And he died a few years ago. He had this really odd cancer, and the NHS, which is the British healthcare system, there was it's actually a really good healthcare system, but there was some really odd quirk where he couldn't get this drug that would have prolonged his life because it was really, really expensive. And this is a guy who had millions and millions of pounds go through his hands, but he'd spent it all on this nightclub, putting out Joy Division records, putting out Happy Monday records, what have you. And this interviewer asked him if he was bitter about it, bitter that he wasn't able to, prolong his life by because he didn't have any money anymore because he'd spent it on all this really cool stuff. And his answer has always stuck with me. It was like, bitter? Are you kidding? I got to put out Unknown Pleasures, which is Joy Division's first album. Like, how many people get to say that? And so, well, look, sorry, David Herring. I mean, like, bringing David Herring to Australia to talk about David Foster Wallace isn't the same thing as putting out Joy Division's first record, but it's probably not even in the same ballpark, but it's maybe in the same suburb the ballpark is in, and that's what happened with OzWallace. Like, David Herring came to Australia to talk about Wallace's work, and like I said earlier, Wallace is still going to be read in 140, 250, who knows, maybe 500 years' time, and OzWallace will have played, in this part of the world, will have played an important part in bringing his work to this part of the world. So, awesome. I'm really, really proud of that,
That's great, man. Well, we're very appreciative
thank you
of
for
the
doing
work
it,
that
Tony.
you did. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry we couldn't be there. Too bad this planet's so big,
Yeah, it is a big-ass planet. And if it does happen next year, you'll be in New Zealand, right, Dave?
Yeah, until about August. So
Okay.
I might just miss it by a few weeks, but...
Well, I nominate, I hereby publicly nominate Lucas Thompson to organise.
Oh, the gauntlet's been thrown
at Sydney University,
Very cool.
Because that's a really great campus. I mean, RMIT is a great campus as well, but Sydney's a lot easier to get to for a lot of Americans as well.
Oh yeah, that's probably true. Hey?
So, If you're listening, Lucas. Yeah.
I mean, you're featured on this episode, Lucas. So hopefully it gets back to you somehow.
Yep.
What are the chances of you coming to the U.S. next year, Tony?
I can't say I'll definitely be there, but I missed last year, as you guys know, and it
haunts you to this day.
It just felt really, really awful. So I really want to be there.
I'll share that big bedroom with you.
That is a big bedroom. Yeah.
That's my bedroom. I had it before you.
Yeah, he's the OG.
You forfeited it.
Actually, that bed is big enough. You and I could sleep in it, and nobody would have together, and nobody would say anything. It's like it's got its own postcode, that bed.
I'm comfortable with it.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Tony, for coming on so early and for all your great work with this conference. We're excited for people to hear about your experience and from all of the presenters coming up. So stay tuned.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks to Nick as well.
Thank you, Nick. Really enjoyed listening to them, and everyone's going to enjoy them as well, I'm sure.
No worries. It's good to chat again.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Okay, testing. There we go. Nick back. Once again, a little bit of a snippet for the Great Concavity podcast. I'm sitting here right now with Taja Eisen and Philip Sayers from the University of Toronto in Canada. And they're going to say a quick hi and a little bit about the conference and what they spoke about.
Hi, I'm Taja Eisen. I'm a combined degree student in law and English literature at the University of Toronto. And my paper was titled Legal Fictions and the Abyss of Total Noise, Wallace and the Problem of Genre. And in the paper, the idea I was trying to get at was, I guess, the idea of the law as a system that we try to use to make sense of experience, much like we might use genre, fiction or nonfiction, to try and organize the world. But I wanted to look at the ways in which it fails, especially in The Pale King. And I used the idea of the legal fiction to get at some of these questions.
Yeah, thanks. It was really interesting as well. It was one of the ones that I remember I said to you I had difficulty tweeting about because I was so focused on following what you were saying and it was new to me. So yeah, that was I quite enjoyed that panel as well.
Cool, thanks so much.
And on to...
My name's Philip Sayers, also at the University of Toronto. My paper was it was about the different metaphors of authorship that are present in The Pale King, both in terms of the published book and the archival material. I was really interested in the really practical side of authorship, the day-to-day labour that is involved in making literature. So that led me to spend a couple of weeks in the Harry Ransom Centre looking at all of the Pale King materials, all of the notes that Wallace took from his accounting classes that he audited.
Thanks, Tony. We'll just continue recording our small snippet. We might leave that in. That's right. So I don't have a big red flashing light saying recording.
No, don't worry. Yeah, so I was interested in the different metaphors that Wallace uses to talk about authorship, both explicitly and implicitly, the way that he compares writing to the kind of work that accountants do, the way that he thinks about the relationship between writing and study, and the way that he uses this idea, the image of the cowboy as a figure that connects to what writers do.
Yeah, I like that idea of the cowboy and the metaphor of it, and I was expecting totally for it to be the kind of the Wild West type cowboys specifically, but then when you moved into that idea of the corralling of herds and organising information around that, and that's when I stopped and looked up and went, oh, I didn't expect it to go there. That was really super interesting. So, how have you felt about the conference so far?
It's been great.
Yeah.
I really like... I really like that it's a small conference and that everybody is turning up at everyone's panels, and it really creates a nice sense of collegiality and discussion. I've really enjoyed that aspect.
Yeah, I've really appreciated the way that that a lot of the papers have, and this is, I guess, a turn that seems to be happening in Wallace studies. They've started because, we've covered the basic ground in
Yes.
Wallace studies at this point, the relationship between Wallace and postmodernism, etc. A lot of the best papers that I've heard have been the ones that connect Wallace's work to really kind of vital concerns in terms of political history. There's been a lot about the relationship between Wallace and neoliberalism. Your paper, Taja, got at the relationship between Wallace and political and legal history,
Yes.
which is another way of connecting it to a really important and debate that can connect Wallace studies to broader political and legal conversations.
Well, it was wonderful to have both of you here. And thanks for having a quick talking head on the podcast as well. And hopefully I'll get lots of other people as well.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks so much.
See ya. Bye-bye. All right, we're live. It's going. Excellent. Hello, everyone. Nick again, not surprisingly. I've managed to just catch Grace Chipperfield when she's on her way, so she's not going to make the conference dinner tonight. But I just thought I'd pop in and say thanks for the awesome Concavity podcast that you took part in. What did you speak about very briefly, and what have been your thoughts about the conference?
Okay, so my paper was on Kafkaesque humour in Wallace's fiction. So I was looking at the idea, my starting point was his essay on Kafka, where he describes US citizens as adolescent,
Yes.
and looking at that in relation to how he sees Kafkaesque humour at work, and then applying that to his fiction to suggest that he's using Kafkaesque kind of funniness to try and get his reader to grow up.
I really enjoyed your paper, and
thank you.
some of the examples, the furious infant, etc. was just...
I was so glad I got to talk about him.
Conference overall?
It's been brilliant, really diverse range of papers. What I've noticed this time is a lot of people focusing on the Pale King more.
Yes.
But I have to say a couple of my highlights, and not just because you're interviewing me, but would be your spectacular show where you kind of opened up about mental health and everything.
Yes. Yeah.
And also just seeing some of the non-academic papers presented here
Yes.
today. Ollie's, for example,
Yes.
them was really, really lovely. I got so much out of it.
And there was an interesting twist to it that I didn't expect, which is reading Wallace might open you up to ways of thinking that are maybe not so healthy sometimes as well.
Yes.
And seeing his own personal diaries and sort of tracking the changes in the way that he thought about things, I found that to be a take that I've not kind of had anyone speak openly about.
It was wonderful, and I think that it reminds me a lot of Matt Luder's paper
Yes.
from Normal this year. So you guys should get in touch if you're listening, because I think that idea of bringing the personal more front and centre into Wallace scholarship seems to be happening a little bit more, which is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I know you've got to run off, but thanks so much for doing a talking head. All right.
I can give you something.
I'm just going to do this right now. I've got Lucas Thompson with me here, and we are in between a couple of the final papers for the conference. Lucas, your Nathan for You paper was incredible, and opened my eyes to more deeply to sort of some of the sincerity in that show. How did you feel about bringing that to the conference?
A little nervous, to be honest, but thank you for the compliment. That's really nice to hear. I didn't know how people are going to find it. I feel like it's a hard sell, that show, to kind of convince people to engage with it. But I feel like there's something important there in terms of Wallace's version of sincerity that's getting expressed. And I feel like people would be interested in it. So that's
I completely agree. Look, it's really great to meet you. I'm sorry that this was a rushed talking head. Okay, back with more conference, what do we call ourselves? Delegates? I don't know. Attendees.
Presenters, keynote speaker,
Keynote
David
speaker,
Herring.
David Herring, Corinne, I forget your surname,
Shiner.
Corinne, and presenting the first paper of the conference. So maybe, Corinne, do we want to start with you? Tell us quickly, briefly, what did you present about?
I presented on Wallace and Michel Serres, a French philosopher who more people should read. and on sensory perception and the construction of the self.
That's right, because
Yes.
that was kind of that thread of embodiment type stuff, and disembodiment. I mean, I'm not the expert here, but that was one of the things where the second day, lots of that stuff started coming together in my head. So to have that going from the very start was really cool and interesting.
Thank you.
I use cool and interesting a lot.
It's all good.
What about you, David? What did you present the keynote about?
That was on the relationship between Wallace and Ronald Reagan. They're thinking about Wallace's relationship with Reagan as a way to unpack and kind of decipher his politics and how those politics changed through the 80s and 90s and to late in his career as well.
Yeah, and once again, there was a thread of sort of neoliberalism in Wallace's work and pushing against it or whatever, all those bits and pieces. And for somebody who really, from the politics side, I knew nothing about it, I know so much more now, and it was fascinating. It was really interesting. I have to mention that you spoke a little bit about the unfinished story from the archive, Wickedness, as well.
Yes.
And that was just fascinating, so it'll be interesting to read more about that down the track. So, general thoughts about the conference?
It's been great. I mean, I've been to quite a few Wallace conferences, and this has been just absolutely fantastic. Really well organised, friendly.
Did you hear that, Tony?
It's been great.
Yeah.
You know, collegial. Everyone's been at pretty much all the papers, which is always good. It's been fantastic.
And I will echo that, having been to many a conference, when you can have those threads, the way they happen is because you've heard everybody's paper.
Yes.
And it's lovely to hear how the papers speak to one another and to actually have the speakers who come later kind of pick up the threads,
Yes.
which I think most people did. So it's been great.
It's been great having you both here as well in Australia. That's been the fun bit for me. Thanks heaps for the talking heads. And hopefully I can stop it. I'll just test we've got audio, which we do. All right. Now speaking to another presenter, Oliver, and I'll get him to introduce himself and let us know what he spoke about today.
Okay, hello, I'm Oliver. I'm 24. I'm a musician and I'm trying to become a librarian. I spoke about the impact that Foster Wallace has had on the self, or myself, and other people's selves, I guess. But I was using my diaries and some of my song lyrics to show, I guess, a development in my psyche, I guess, from someone who was maybe not very self-critical or self-conscious towards someone who was slightly more self-critical and self-conscious through reading Foster Wallace's work. And yeah, that was, I'm not necessarily sure that that's an awesome thesis, but it was kind of what my instincts were telling me is something that has influenced me from reading his works.
I have to admit what I found, and I know a couple of other attendees found, is that when you mentioned that reading Wallace kind of invoked a new way of thinking for you, but I really liked this idea that some of that maybe wasn't healthy for you. And when you showed some diary entries, because you seem to keep meticulous diaries, that showed that kind of change in thinking and looking at the world, I actually found that really powerful and kind of a new perspective of the way that Wallace has an impact on his readers.
Yeah, well, I was trying to show that there were good things about Wallace's self-consciousness and, his ability to target himself and be so fastidious in picking all his problems out actually allows him to kind of grow to become more, a kind of better person. And we were actually talking in the conference about shame and what is good about shame. Some things are good about shame, Shame can just make you into a better person when you reflect on it.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's kind of a point where shame and, I guess just it might come back to low self-esteem where you can't actually see yourself in any sort of good life, and you're getting in this loop of your own limitations rather than your strengths and stuff. I don't know, but anyway, I was really curious because my instincts has always been that I've always associated Foster Wallace with the word self-conscious, and I think being self-conscious is not always the best thing. Sometimes it's better just to be conscious of the world around you. Yes. And I think Foster Wallace was conscious of that himself. He was trying to get over that and to become, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, overall impressions of the conference in 20 seconds?
It was awesome, yeah. It's great to meet people from Australia who are interested in the same stuff, and I don't really have that many friends so I can talk to about it, so it's
Same.
great.
I've been, it's just the other end of the wire for 20 years, and meeting other people with the same interests is just fantastic.
Yeah.
And of course, we're at the post-conference dinner now, so it's all a bit noisy, but thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
Cheers. All right, testing, we're on. All right, well, we're having a bit of a break outside of the Lincoln for the conference dinner, but right here I have conference organiser extraordinaire, Dr. Tony Mcmahon. Tony, how do you feel? It's all done and dusted, almost.
I feel pretty relieved, I've got to say. I feel pretty proud of everybody who presented, everybody who made the effort to travel here. As I'm sure Nick's already told you, we've had people come from Canada, from Denmark, from Liverpool, obviously with Dave Herring. We've had lots of people come from America, and of course lots of people come from various parts of Australia. And I'm just really kind of proud of pretty much everybody who just showed up and presented, and a little overwhelmed, to be honest. Yeah.
A really tight ship was run. I know that, I've been at conferences, not just the one Wallace conference I've been to before this one, but, tech ed conferences and what have you. And when sessions run over time, it's just nightmarish to keep on track. And I think, the people hosting the panels and convening and, the looks and nods to you, I think kept a pretty tight ship the whole time. For me, that's one of the highlights. We got through so much stuff.
Yeah, we did. I think I may have been a school teacher in another life, Nick. Oh, hang on, no, that's this life, right? It is important. I think you're right. It's when people go over time, it's kind of inconsiderate, and it's detrimental to the other people they're sharing a panel with. Not to mention the people on the panels yet to come on that day. So that happened once or twice perhaps, but not kind of severely.
No, not at all.
And it was something I was really conscious of from being at other conferences, not just Wallace conferences, but other conferences more generally. Something I really wanted to keep an eye on, so I did.
Look, super top quality keynote and plenary as well. Like that's, once again, a conference can sometimes be defined by those, and they were incredible. Yeah.
Well, David Herring. I mean, my co-convener Bridget, who deserves as much, if not more, credit than me for organising this conference. She's going to tell me when she hears this that it's masculinist of me to say this, but I'm going to say it. Dave Herring's, in my opinion, the world's most important Wallace scholar, and he, of course, was the keynote speaker. Lucas Thompson is Australia's most important Wallace scholar, and he was the plenary speaker. So, the combination of those two together, it's pretty unbeatable.
Yeah, and look, the social stuff was good as well. We had our drinks on the first night. We had our spectacular where we had a pretty nice and powerful open chat and banter, and I really enjoyed that. Bit cathartic for me. I'm not going to talk about it because that's the whole point. I didn't want it to be recorded. But then the football last night and a really chilled but nice dinner at the end. Would you do it again?
Would I organise another Wallace conference in Australia? Probably not, but this is because I have barely slept for the past 2 weeks. My cat hasn't seen me for 3 days. He's going to not talk to me for another 3 weeks. So at this stage I'm saying no, but I suspect it might be one of those things where I get home, get a couple of good nights sleep. The cat starts, leaving hair on my favourite new Wallace t-shirt that I got on Friday night. And I start thinking, maybe I should do it again in 2 years' time. I wouldn't do it every year. I don't think there's the numbers here in Australia to do it every year.
Agreed.
But I think it's something that could be done every second year. Perhaps in 2 years' time we could take it to Sydney. Something like that.
Yes.
I know Sydney's a lot easier for a lot of people to get to, like the Canadians, for example.
Yes.
They were flying back to Sydney tonight and then home. So if we held it in Sydney, that would kind of make it so much easier for them.
Sure.
And look, I might, allow myself to be talked into kind of coming on in an advisory capacity for that or something.
We did miss that there wasn't a paper from you.
Yes.
And I know that the constraints around that are horrific and stressful.
Yeah.
But if I think back to 2 years ago at that panel in down back here in Melbourne, and you spoke about Australian slang and in Wallace's works, and that kind of side to things is also another. There's another interesting perspective. So it'd be nice to hear from you as well in a future Australian one.
Yeah. Well, look, if it does happen here again, then perhaps I'll feel like I'm in a position to be able to deliver a paper, which I just didn't feel like I was here. I was too busy with other stuff. I think there's a real lot of interesting stuff about Wallace and Australia. People might not realise it, but he does use, as you say, a lot of Australian slang in his work. He kind of name checks Australia a hell of a lot. His sister lived here for 2 years, and they wrote letters to each other, and they spoke about Australian culture or lack thereof, and Australian idioms and Australian practices. And this is something people may not know, that his sister Amy told me recently, that while he was composing Broom of the System, Wallace listened almost exclusively to Midnight Oil, who were, of course, an Australian band, and actually wrote her a letter when he was coming to the end of the book, because the tape was wearing out, and he was fretting that he wasn't going to be able to finish the book if he didn't have his Midnight Oil tape. So his sister had to go hunting around Brisbane to find the original person whose record she taped.
Wow.
And she remade the tape and sent it over to him. So he had a new tape so he could finish of Midnight Oil, so he could finish Broom of the System. So there's just a lot of little kind of things like that. I mean, Bill Latanzi spoke about Wallace going to John Newcomb's tennis camp in Texas in the early 70s, and so there being an Australian connection there, and even went so far as to suggest, albeit a little facetiously, that he went. So Bill went online and got all these photos of John Newcomb's tennis camp, and suggested, like I said, a little facetiously, that perhaps it was without John Newcomb's or Wallace's experience at John Newcomb's camp, there may have been no Enfield Tennis Academy.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how that's going to hold water, but it's fun to kind of think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, look, Tony, thank you again, and thank you from me. It's been incredible to be here, and let's hope there's at least one more or many more to come.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Oh, we're on again, and I'm here now with Mitch. Do you want to introduce yourself, Mitch?
G'day, my name's Dr. Mitch Cunningham.
Oh, doctor, that's right, of course.
Yeah, it's recently doctor, thanks to Mr. David Foster Wallace. I presented at a conference on Friday on the topic of psychoanalysis and reader response theory in Wallace.
Did you have fun?
I had so much fun. I always have fun at Wallace conferences. I remember the Paris conference especially. That was my first chance as a young scholar to sort of meet everybody and go out for beers with everybody. And it's been really good to reprise that this time around.
I remember when we first met a couple of years ago at the Melbourne panel that we did, and I was actually overwhelmed because I know, you were sharing with me your knowledge about Wallace, but you were also, I was really excited about how you were talking about new waves of criticism and scholarship, and it made me excited about new stuff to come. So to know, to see that starting 2 years ago and then come through with this conference and see all that kind of stuff, it's been really cool and exciting. So, look at that, I get a message and I haven't turned that off. So that's right, we'll let that play as part of the audio. But finally, overall impressions, what do you think?
Overall impressions, well, I agree with you, first of all, that it was exciting to see a new wave of Wallace scholarship sort of addressing the contemporary moment.
Yeah.
So there was a fair fair bit of political consideration going into what was going on, which I think is important.
Yes.
I think there are lessons from Wallace that need to be learned and need to be applied to, again, the current moment. Maybe not 10 years ago, maybe right now.
Yeah,
There was also something, I know you were mentioning with Tony just before, your discussion with him on the Friday night.
Yes.
And there was something that you said that stood out to me was just about reaching that point of feeling open with just sharing your life with a particular group of people.
Yes.
For whom Wallace had sort of opened the door on just that sense of being able to talk and able to share. And I completely agree with that. And I think that was here at the conference.
Yes, I totally agree.
That spirit of camaraderie. I'm not that experienced with conferences, but I don't know how common it is for virtually everyone from the conference to want to move as a cohort and just spend time together afterwards and just share a bit about life.
See, for me, it's one Wallace conference before this one, and education conferences, English teaching conferences, technology conferences with hundreds, if not thousands, of delegates, and they're huge, and it's dissemination of information, not the discussion around it, not so much, and that's the kind of thing I loved about this.
Totally.
Mitch, thank you so much, and let's hope for if there are more to come, we get to speak more.
Thank you, Nick.
OzWallace 2019.
Oh, of course, and a scooter starts up at the time. I'm here with Bill. Bill, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us very briefly what you spoke about at the conference?
Sure, I'm Bill Latanzi. I came here from Boston, invited by Tony. I've never been invited to an intercontinental conference before, to sort of reproduce the talk I had done previously of a tour of David Foster Wallace's Boston, which had some a fig leaf of intellectual ideas around Wallace's transformation of the kind of unpromising regular places of his life into the art of infinite jest.
I agree. I think there were some great images in there. And, for me, as somebody who hasn't visited that area, it was great to get that kind of virtual tour thing. But am I allowed to talk about the Texas spoiler?
Sure.
I was had my mind blown about the John Newcomb Tennis School. How did you find out about that? I don't know how I've missed it. Maybe I've just been busy the last few years.
No, it's just a single line in the Max biography.
Right. Okay, that's why I missed it.
and I started looking, and there's just this amazing website that, if you look, Wallace had gone. He paid his own way, I guess, to go there one summer. And it's a 3-week program, and I don't know, he may have had ambitions to be a professional tennis player. And there's a year-round academy there that's still there, a pre-professional academy.
Sure.
And when I looked at the website, I thought, oh my God, this is the Enfield Tennis Academy. And the more I looked at those videos, there's this great section of John Newcomb lecturing the kids and saying, it's not about your strokes, it's about yourself. You have to analyze yourself. And I thought, wow, I guess I know where that came from.
That was a moment in the conference, and there was that nice hush around the room of people looking at each other going, what? It was just great. What overall impressions? What'd you think?
Oh, the greatest time ever. It was so much fun. Melbourne is, a warm, welcoming, wonderful place. First of all, I was really kind of set back and undone by all the smiling people I encountered, all the shop people and restaurant people. Just like, what do you mean you're smiling and being nice to me? What do you want from me? But in fact, they're just friendly. And the conference couldn't have been better. People from all over, all gathered together to talk about this work that they love and have problems with and can't get away from.
Yes.
And you feel like you're part of a community and part of something that's a community that's growing and pushing forward.
Yes.
And I feel really lucky to be a part of it. It's like in theater we say nobody has to do everything. Everybody just has a little piece of the thing.
Sure.
And it's a little bit like that. So
I agree.
Had a great time.
Thank you so much for your time. Hope to meet you again.
Yeah, I'll see you again.
See you again.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Okay, I'm here with Aisling, and I'll let her introduce herself and have a little chat about what she spoke about.
Well, I'm Aisling Smith, and I'm a PhD candidate from Monash University. I presented a paper on shame narratives in the Pale King at OzWallace. So tracing shame through two different story arcs in the Pale King. Firstly, firstly Chris Fogel and secondly
Yes.
David Cusk. And yeah, just talking about the status of shame there.
I had a very personal response. I spoke at the Wheeler Centre launch for the Pale King a few years back. I was invited to speak, and I read David Cusk's one of his sections about sweating because that's me, and it invokes shame. And I walk around with spare t-shirts. And, you know, Tony's made comments about Nick's great with the t-shirts. He loves his t-shirts. But, you know, the other side of it is I carry those t-shirts around because I sweat heaps. And I get stressed about the sweating. So, you know, that resonated with me. And I'm sure it resonates in different ways with some of the readers. And I'm also taking over what your paper was about here. But but it's a part that I was fascinated by. And I'm really glad it was spoken about.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
General impressions?
Oh, the conference has just been amazing. I mean, the crowd is just so welcoming and supportive. As well as scholars and people interested in Wallace seem to be. Diversity has been great. The range of topics has been amazing. It's just, cannot speak highly enough of it.
It's been great meeting you. Again, we met a couple of years ago here as well, didn't we?
We did, a few years ago. So.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
and hopefully next time.
Definitely next time.
And we're back on, and this time I'm with Tor. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is, and I'll pronounce it in Danish to be exotic, Tor Ry Andersen, and I'm from Aarhus University. And I did a paper called The First and Second Coming of Infinite Jest, and it was basically about stuff I bought on eBay and Ape Books during the past 10 years or so. To be more specific, I did a paper on all the pre-publication excerpts of Infinite Jest that came out since beginning in 1992 and up to the publication of the novel itself. And the reason why I did that paper was because no one's really done anything on those excerpts before. And I find that kind of strange, especially considering the massive number of excerpts which came out.
Yes.
There was more than 10 excerpts which appeared before the novel itself. So one of my motives for doing the paper was basically just to set the record straight, to try to gather all the excerpts together, which hasn't really been done before. The bibliographies I've managed to find in various places are either incomplete or have a couple of errors. So,
absolutely, and that includes stuff on the Howling Phantods as well.
Well, and that was one of the best, most useful resources. But there were a couple of tiny errors there.
It is out of date. I'm not going to argue with that. What I loved is looking around the audience while you were presenting at the covers where these pre-publication materials appeared, and seeing people like David Herring rapidly scribbling down as I was. I'd never seen that before, and the page count, 130 pages-ish of pre-publication material from Infinite Jest.
Yeah, that's quite a lot.
Yes, it is.
As I said during my talk, I mean, I'm sure not all readers read every excerpt before, but if you were a Wallace fan in the early 90s, you certainly had the opportunity to acquaint yourself with the novel before it came out. Another thing I talked about in my paper was kind of a strange imbalance in those excerpts. If you look at them together, what I find kind of fascinating is that the whole Hal Incandenza ETA strand of Infinite Jest is practically absent in those excerpts. Most of them deal with Enid House, with Don Gately, with the down and outs in Boston. And it's kind of strange because, I mean, looking at Infinite Jest, the published novel, Hal is just as important a character as Don, but he's absent in those excerpts, even though Wallace began writing about Hal and then eventually moved on to Don. So
it was such an engaging paper, and I'm so pleased I got to see it and be here rather than hear about a small part of it through the podcast. Final thoughts about the conference? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I loved the format of the conference. Talked earlier in the evening about how it was comparable to the Paris conference in 2014 in that all people were together in the same room during the 3 days. So a conversation kind of evolves as it couldn't have if people had been attending parallel panels. So that's the way conferences should be done, I think. So.
It was an amazing time. Thank you so much. I'm glad I got to meet you. And have a safe trip home.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. right, another one of these. We're getting a whole cracker of amount of conference attendees. Who do we have here?
I'm Nat Seffold. I presented a paper called The Ghost in the Machine Learning, all about David Foster Wallace, artificial intelligence and programming it to write like him.
I have to admit that I had a total geek out moment about natural language processing and how you were talking about taking the infinite jest text and then parsing it. But how were you parsing it?
Parsing it is kind of almost the boring, really labor-intensive part of the project. Just converting the raw text into data, basically, breaking down the syntax, semantics, even the rhythms.
And you weren't doing that with software, were you?
A little bit where I could, but a lot of it was very manual and labor-intensive, yeah.
And there was the kind of ongoing endpoint. It was really interesting to talk about some of the systems that you were thinking about using to get to that point, and from my perspective, some really exciting things, but also some people find terrifying about language processing and AI and that kind of stuff. Anything else you wanted to add about future directions for what you're trying to do?
Obviously artificial intelligence is a big area of investment for companies like Google and Facebook and Apple. Obviously the companies people are excited and scared about, just because what they're working on have so much potential for good, but for bad as well. But this application should definitely be more on the fun side.
Yes.
And more ethically neutral than maybe what the big companies themselves are planning to use their programs for.
And what do you think of the conference?
The conference was a lot of fun. Even after being to normal, just met a whole ton of new people with some really crazy, brilliant ideas that I'll probably spend the next few weeks just parsing and breaking down what I feel about them.
Yeah, same. Look, thanks for your time, and it was great to meet you. Cheers.
No worries. Thank you, Nick.
Okay, I'm outside after the conference dinner with Thomas. Would you like to introduce yourself and give us just a splash of what you spoke about at the conference?
Yeah, so I'm Thomas Rankert. I'm a postdoc at Heidelberg University, Germany, and I spoke tried to give a theological exploration into David Foster Wallace's work. With respect to the topics of salvation, sin, and church, and I try to do that by disregarding all the biographical stuff that's out there about Wallace and that's being discussed extensively in other channels.
And that's what I really enjoyed about it. I think when you took it outside of those channels, that made it engaging and interesting for me. And that was a new thing for me. So once again, of the many highlights of the conference, it was great to be to be exposed to new ideas and let myself be exposed and think about them.
Very pleased to hear that.
What about the conference as a whole? Any overarching comments or thoughts?
Well, it was very enjoyable. It was a perfect mixture of different opinions and perspective. And the interesting thing for me was to realize that a lot of the observations and a lot of the work and the approaches actually kind of converged into similar or parallel results or conclusions.
Yes, I agree. That was a feeling that coalescence happened sort of as the 3 days rolled on was just really nice. And my brain hurt a lot, as it usually does for me when I'm doing too much thinking, but it was just a great time. Thanks for speaking. It was wonderful to meet you and hope to see you again in the future.
Thanks. So yeah, one more thing before I forget. I'm very grateful for the grant that I received from the International David Foster Wallace Society to help with the coverage of the travel expenses and so on. I'm really grateful for that, so thanks a lot.
And they also gave a grant for travel as well to New Zealand scholar Tasha Haynes. So the Wallace Society is all over this. I guess I can't not mention the wonderful merch and the pens, also branded with the logo. And I'm having a bit of a laugh here while I say it, but to feel that the community and the society and everything is coming together is a really exciting thing. Not to mention the upcoming journal as well. All right, we're recording. Okay, so I think we're down to the last few people after the conference dinner. I'm particularly, I think I'm doing okay with the way that I'm speaking, which is all right. But I'll pass one to a final few people. I'll get them to introduce themselves first and give some impressions about what they heard, what they spoke about at the conference. Who have we got up first?
I'm Tim. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Tim.
I am a Wallace reader, first and foremost, I think. Someone who's interested in him, not in an academic. So I am interested in the academic stuff, but I'm not well read in it. And I'm here as I feel like personally I'm going through a strange journey theologically from a sort of atheism, anti-theism thing into potentially religion, potentially Christianity, and Wallace is one of my arrows pointing me in that direction.
So, conference as a whole, what do you think?
I love the conference, yeah. I highly recommend coming. I've met many kindred spirits, started some great conversations with some people, the conversations I wanted to have as well. So,
yeah, right.
If you are not, if you're a sort of a novice in philosophy and theology, but feel like you understand Wallace at its, at his human level, I would recommend coming along and having some conversations.
It's a really welcoming community, and I'm continually overwhelmed with that kind of thing around that Wallace community in general. So many different elements coming together at conferences like these across the world, so it's a really exciting thing to be part of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for your comments. Hope to see you at the next conference.
I'll be there.
Dan, would you introduce yourself to the podcast and give us a bit of a word on what you presented?
Yes, hello. I'm Danny Sheaf, and my formal academic training is in philosophy, which, I've had a lot of interesting perspectives, but I gave, I guess, a more politically informed paper, and essentially I was arguing that there's a lot of readings of Wallace that kind of reduce, I guess, the sight of the sight of rethinking some of the kind of postmodern solipsism of some of these issues. They reduce that to an individual stance, I guess. And my argument was that you can't fight these kind of cultural issues at the level of the individual subject. And I would argue that lots of Wallace's fiction is an attempt to kind of rethink the way that we think about social criticism, and we tend to kind of conflate what should be social criticism with self-criticism, and we kind of internalize these things, and we think that we can rethink our problems on the level of subjectivity. And I would argue that what Wallace is showing, that these things only happen on the social level. Like, we are fundamentally, even ontologically, social human beings. And human meaning is something that is social. It's not something subjective. It's not something that's in your head. It's something that is, by definition, social. So you can't overcome these issues by psychologizing them. You can't overcome them just yourself. You can only overcome them by actually engaging and fighting against the cultural trend which tells you that it's you alone, and it's you alone that's responsible for your happiness and things like that. So I'm trying to bring that out in regards to the Pale King.
I'm actually really impressed with your summary of your paper there, because I thought it was a pretty heavy paper, and it was in the first day of the conference, and in fact a lot of other threads. It sort of started a number of threads in the conference as well, talking about the individual versus the collective and that kind of stuff. And I'm oversimplifying here, but it was really good to have that kind of that start to the conference, and then have that eked out and teased out in a number of different ways. So, conference as a whole, what do you think?
Yeah, it was wonderful. As you say, these different perspectives. There was an aspect of
pop culture.
A goal was scored, but there was an aspect of we all, I felt like there was this aspect that we were all hovering around some really central issues, and one of them was this kind of, how does the social relate to the individual?
Yes.
And are we in our own heads, or are our heads part of something collective? And yeah, it was really interesting. I could read aspects of my own project into almost every paper, and I really gained a lot. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to speak to people after this about how our seemingly different kind of approaches were actually hovering around the same central issue.
I agree. Thank you so much for your time, and it's great meeting you, Danny. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, testing. Hello, everyone. I'm sitting here in a small office at the University of Canberra.
My little cloister, my little academic cubicle.
It's 4 days after the conference, and this gentleman here had to run off to fly back to, I believe, deliver a lecture first thing the next morning.
Yes, that's true.
So would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Duncan Driver. I'm an assistant professor of teacher education at the University of Canberra.
How good is it to be on location? That's one of the nice things about having another Canberra person at the conference. So quickly, like everyone else, Duncan, do you want to give us a 1.5, 2 minute spiel of what your little...
My little contribution, modest though it was? Yeah, sure. I wanted to look at Wallace's teaching. I'd anticipated that most of the papers would probably be necessarily focused on elements of Wallace's writing. And so as an education academic, I thought I could bring an interesting perspective on what I saw to be elements of his pedagogy and his practice. So the paper that I delivered was in thirds. The first third was really an attempt to look at what I saw as paradoxes or contradictions in Wallace's teaching. An obvious one might be students complaining about what a pedagogical hard-ass he was with pop quizzes and never fail to proofread something you turn into me.
Yes.
And the other side of it being students saying, I can't believe how much he cared for students and genuinely tried to make real connections and, cried at the end of units of study at the thought of not seeing them again.
Yes, yes.
So that was one example. I spent the sort of central section of the paper trying to find ways of resolving some of these contradictions, or at least saying there's a complementary element to them if you look at education theory. So, we were talking before the tape started rolling about Dylan Williams, who's one of my favourite education gurus. Look him up, he looks like a nightclub bouncer. And I think he's the only education academic to have his own reality TV show as well.
Yes.
But I used him in order to introduce this idea that education is predicated now more than ever on a concept of growth. And it should be every individual student's desire to grow personally. John Hattie in Australia talks about similar things. We should expect a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of input, regardless of what level students are actually performing at. So I wanted to talk about that idea of growth, personal responsibility, and connect some of the dots between Wallace as quite a humanist writer and those concepts in education.
Yes.
The last third of the paper was really an attempt to look at if we can apply some of what I was saying about Wallace as a teacher to Wallace's writing. And sometimes you look at scholarship and they're quite separate things.
Yes,
you might look
absolutely.
at the aspects of the Pale King or aspects of Infinite Jest, and then there might be a little section, and this is Wallace as a teacher, and have a look at these core syllabi. So I wanted to see if there were interesting points of connection between the two, and I focused that on the short story Think as an example of something like Wallace the teacher using the pages of his book as an extension of the classroom.
I was fascinated, but I'm coming in from the same direction as you with this background in education and teaching, and I know that I've lapped up absolutely every piece of text where it's someone observing Wallace teaching, him talking about his teachings quietly, not too much, or students talking about his teaching and what type of an influence he was as a teacher. I'm going to leave it there for a moment and just wonder what you thought of the conference as a whole.
I really, really loved it. I didn't know what to expect going in because it had been a few years since I went to any kind of academic conference. I liked the fact that it had a degree of intimacy to it. I think a lot of academic conferences, a colleague was saying she was at one at exactly the same time. It had over 1,000 people at it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know what the body count for us was, but it felt like maybe 20 to 30.
Yeah, I think it was between that. Yeah.
And I felt like by the end of the conference, I had some degree of familiarity with each person present, which was lovely. It created something like a supportive environment. The other thing that struck me was the diversity of interests present.
Yes.
I suppose that's something you could say at a lot of conferences, but they don't often strike you as much. I expected maybe because it's Wallace, it's relatively niche for everyone to be talking about elements of postmodernism and the Pale King.
Yes, yep.
You know, and that was certainly present. But I really liked a diverse range of interests, and I think maybe that's partly down to Tony doing such a good job selecting presentations.
Yeah, I think he did a great job there.
And I was fascinated to hear perspectives on elements of Wallace's writing that I hadn't considered before.
One thing I like to think back to, and it's occurred every time I've met new people through Wallace as a connection, and that includes you as well, is it really feels like that if you're speaking to someone else that's there because they've appreciated his writing, there's already this big barrier that's just dropped and gone.
You're not as guarded as you would be because you feel like there's already an implicit point of connection.
Yes, which is, I guess that's the case with any hobby or interest or whatever, but it just feels so exacerbated when you're in that kind of community situation.
That's right. It reminds me of a line in an Alan Bennett play called The History Boys. This is a play I'm going to take you to next weekend.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, there's a moment where one of the teachers says the best moments in reading are when you come across something, a thought, a feeling that you thought was particular to you, and yet here it is written down, often by somebody who's long dead. And it's almost as if a hand is coming out of the text and taking yours. And in many ways, that idea goes against every direction, every kind of implied arrow of postmodernism, which is all about the text as degree zero, and you know, the reader is the one who's constructing meaning, and the author function, not the actual author. But maybe if we, to pick up on one of the paper's ideas, maybe if Wallace is approaching writing from this perspective of new sincerity, it actually is about a point of connection between two people. And if that's there in the text, it justifies what you're saying about connecting to people who also have that interest.
Do you always say interesting things?
Only when I'm with you. And only when I have a platform to perform on, whether digital or real.
Yes. Look, I'm so pleased that we made time to catch up and get you on the podcast. And I guess I'll be seeing you in a couple of weeks at History Boys.
Absolutely.
Awesome. See ya.
See ya.
And we're back from Nick's interviews. Nick, thanks so much again for all your awesome corresponding on the ground on our behalf. We really appreciate it. Honorary host for this episode, Nick Maniatis. So just a few kind of closing remarks for episode 34. And then we'll see you guys next time. But we recently, Matt, got to celebrate 2 years of this podcast existing. October 2015 it started, and it still exists, so that's cool. Thanks everyone for listening for the last couple of years, for all your support. It's been amazing doing this with you. We also want to mention, very sadly, that episode 29 guest Charlie Harris recently passed away, and the Wallace community has been, just reeling from that, and so we want to offer our condolences to his family and loved ones, and just say how much we've appreciated Charlie in this community. And
Charlie is a big part of the reason why there is a David Foster Wallace conference in Illinois State in Bloomington Normal. And frankly, he's the reason why David Foster Wallace lived in Bloomington Normal for many years as a professor at ISU, is that Charlie Harris hired him and was the chair of the department there. And he would not have ended up there as long as he did if it were not for Charlie Harris. And me personally, there's a lot of people that I have met in my travels of studying Wallace, and that I find to be total inspirations. And Nick Maniatis, who we just talked to, is one of them. And Nick is a big inspiration to me, and I'm really thankful to him. And Charlie Harris was sort of like a mentor to me. And when I first met him, I knew of him before I met him because he was the chair of the department, and he did a lot to bring FC2 and Dalkey Archive together as a publishing presence in Central Illinois, and also as a Barth scholar. And then to meet him and just see how really welcoming and kind he was as an emeritus professor, and to meet his wife, who is super sharp person herself, and like if you ever get a chance to have a conversation with Victoria Harris, I highly recommend it. And just every year as the conference grew bigger and bigger in Normal, having Charlie there was a huge part of it. And that's why whatever I thought of, the one person I wanted to have on the podcast last year for sure, or even years before in 2015, was Charlie Harris. So having him, I'm really thankful that we got to have him on the show. And when I got the news, the end of October, beginning of November, I guess, that he had passed away, I was just shocked and saddened because he seemed in such good health this summer. And I corresponded with him pretty frequently, even after the conference is over. I always correspond with him, and I was just very, very saddened to hear that he'd passed, because I really looked up to him. So it meant a lot to me to get to interview him this summer.
Absolutely. I'm hard pressed to think of a more warm and genuinely amazing person than Charlie. Like you said, for him to be an emeritus professor and to be so humble, and you often think of academics like that as kind of maybe staunch and closed off, but Charlie was the exact opposite of that. Just an amazing guy. So we'll deeply miss Charlie.
I'm just thankful that we got to spend the time that we had with him. I mean, I had plans with him to, do some more things in the future that are probably not going to happen now, and I'm very sad about that. And I just, feel slightly bad that I didn't really. This is when someone dies suddenly. You didn't get a chance to say goodbye. I was talked to him about a lot of different issues that were personal to me, and maybe we can talk about those at some point in the future of some of the things that he did to the conference in general and to the community and the publishing community there. We did talk about that a bit this summer, on our podcast with Jim Plath. But no, he's just a super important person in the history of Wallace studies. And, he was on the board of the Bloomsbury's committee of the David Foster Wallace studies, the first, series of academic books, of which Lucas Thompson's book was the first. I mean, Charlie was on that committee, and he's on a lot of boards. He was on the board of Dalkey Archive Press, and just, incredibly committed member of his community. So he's just a huge loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a few other people we want to mention on this show, Dave.
A friend of ours, Samantha Wallace, who you've heard before on the show, has a new podcast, which is kind of in a similar realm as ours. It's a literary podcast, and it's called Circulating Spaces: Literary and Language Worlds in a Global Age, in which her and a co-host explore what it means to engage with literature as sort of a global scale community through a series of podcasts, and we'll put a link to that in our show notes. We also want to give a special, enthusiastic shout out to listener Scarlett Sims, who was on Jeopardy a few weeks back and actually managed to defeat the reigning champion Austin Rogers. So Scarlett, well done. It was super fun watching you and learning the next day that you follow our podcast and listen to it. So that was very cool to see. So way to go. We also want to say hey to Brian Cooper, who's a listener with whom I've had a quite extensive dialogue lately about Synecdoche, New York, the film we talked about last episode with Ellard. And then we got into all kinds of other things about theology and other films and stuff too. So, Brian, thanks for that. Another shout out to David Drury, Stephanie Drury, and Dawn Cerny. We went out for drinks a couple weeks ago in Seattle. Talked some Wallace, talked about Robin O'Neill, talked about Dawn's husband, D.W. Burnham, who is, Robin claims her biggest literary influence, like is the best reader that she knows and puts her onto all the best stuff. So thanks again for hanging out to you guys. Yeah, that's a lot. It comes from her too. And also, we want to thank Nick Jackson, who yesterday posted on our Facebook wall a picture of him on a cruise ship eating lobster, holding supposedly fun thing and consider the lobster. Nick, thanks for that. That was a great moment of levity. And Matt, if people want to get in touch with us on the social media things, where can they find us?
We are at Concavity Show on Twitter and Instagram, and you can email us concavityshow@gmail.com. I still have some stickers. If you want a sticker that says Great Concavity, email me at concavityshow@gmail.com. And we have a Facebook page. I guess you just search The Great Concavity. I don't know.
That's right. It's that easy. Awesome. And thanks as usual to Robin O'Neill and Parquet Courts for their art that's associated with our show. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Turn on the white noise murmur of the AM band and the last classic rock bands, last solid record.
So, hello everyone. This is Nick Maniatis again, corresponding from, Australia.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
it
it's
Australia?
I'm pretty sure that Australia's a continent.
And I'm
pretty sure that that's the continent we're in.
This is Dr. Tony Mcmahon here next to me.
Hello, everybody.
And I might just slow down and wait for this celebration music to go.
Sure.
There we go. But Tony, where are we right now?
Well, we're in Melbourne. We're at Etihad Stadium, although I don't like to say that because it's so corporate. We're at Dockland Stadium.
Dockland is what I prefer as well.
Yep. So it's an AFL venue / concert venue / there's like a speedway motorcycle race here in a couple of weeks. They do all sorts of things here, but tonight we're watching a football game. And when I say football, I don't mean that odd game with the round ball and the net and the goalkeeper. What's that called, Nick?
Football.
Soccer, right, yeah. I don't mean that. I mean real football, Australian football, AFL. But in an interesting little twist, it's actually a women's AFL game because the men are having a break. And it's just way cool. It's just kind of really, really fun and really, really skillful and really, really awesome. And these women are fantastic, and there's all these Americans with confused looks on their face, and there's a couple of Germans and a guy from Denmark.
Someone from Liverpool.
There's a Liverpool person, some bloke, Herring or something.
Something like that.
Wrote some book about the David Foster somebody. Yeah. Bill Latanzi is the only one who really understands the game, but he's from Boston. And they're a very Boston's a bit like Melbourne. It's a sports-mad place. We're mad about our sports in Melbourne. What can I say? It's the Saturday night of the conference. I thought we'd do something different. And, there's a whole bunch of us here at the football.
We'll have to... We'll see if we can edit out some of the background sound, but I did a test before, and with this, there we go. It's halftime. The music's going to start up. We might, but I might just put over to Bill for a moment and get some impressions of the evening so far and the game so far.
It's completely insane, this game. It's basically no rules. You run back and forth, you kick the ball, and people cheer. So it's actually quite wonderful. Now, seriously, it's fun to watch. It's a little like rugby, but when you pass the ball, you have to punch it strangely, kind of like a baked ham or a loaf of bread to your teammate. And there are these 4 posts, 2 are higher than the ones, like goalposts in American football. And if you kick it through those goalposts, it's 6 points, like a proper touchdown in football. If you kick it through the side, it's like a consolation prize through the outer post. And they give you a point because they feel bad for you. In America, we just fire you from the team if that happens. But here they give you a point, which I think is nice.
Sure. We're on the Concavity podcast right now while we're at the game, and just wondering what you think of the game that you're viewing so far.
It's great. The rules are completely unfathomable to me. I'm reminded of Stitt, who describes tennis as an infinite number of possibilities within a bounded space. He hasn't seen Australian football. I mean, this is complexity, an erratically shaped ball, and I guess 40 people in the field. So there's complexity for you, but it's very enjoyable. Yeah.
What do you think of our conference entertainment being at a stadium?
Oh, I think it's great. I've been looking forward to it ever since Tony mentioned it in an email. Instead of the usual hanging around in bars, what's not to like here? So.
Right now, everyone, we are. This is the end of the evening of the second day of the conference, and I'm overwhelmed already. So, chilling out at the football with a number of wonderful people is just an incredible way to finish, and a testament to Tony's organisation as well. All right, I'm going to move along and see who else we've got here. Thomas, how are you feeling about the evening?
Well, it's great, obviously, but also quite confusing, and I feel like watching something new to me at all, which is always a great experience.
Concavity podcast live from the AFL. Who are we speaking to right now?
Shelley Greaves-Zirkle.
Hello, Shelley.
Danny Zirkle.
Hello. And Shelley, I sent out some amazing tweets this afternoon of your Enantiad puppets, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about your impressions of AFL.
I'm starting to catch on a little bit. I was just informed, however, if this were a men's game, that the score would be 100, and I attribute that to just the fact that the men have no defense.
But I think Tony's done a wonderful job of organising a social occasion that is away from the conference, and it's somewhere really different.
And we're truly unique.
Thank you for your comments this evening. Hopefully we'll have some more Wallacean professional discussion tomorrow.
Did I say band camp? I
did.
I meant summer camp.
Band camp works, man.
That's something you really should cut out because, band camp and summer.
Because it means you've been watching like American Pie recently, or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's.
No one wants that on their reputation, right?
Yeah, that's something you really need to cut out. And I know you won't, because I just listened to your interview with Grace, and you were saying you were going to cut all this stuff out, and you didn't.
Yeah, I always leave that stuff in because it ends up being like the funniest stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, all right.